Greetings. Welcome to Truth Stream. Today we are here with Andrew Basiago, and we are very excited. In fact, one of our viewers, I was trying to look it up, commented that we should have him on our show. So we do read our comments. So I looked him up. I was blown away, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is so up Scott's alley. You're going to hear Scott talking a little bit more to Andrew than I'm going to sit back in awe, and
we'll see.
We'll see. But gentlemen, this is so great to have you here, Andrew. Thank you for being here, and welcome to Truth Stream.
Good to be here.
All right. Well, Mr. Stone, I'll have you kick this one off.
Well, where to begin? There's so much that we can cover, but maybe somewhere around the beginning for the audience that is not familiar with your story. What is Project Pegasus, and how did you come to be involved with it?
Project Pegasus was a classified defense-related research and development program focusing on time-space exploration at the time of the emergence of time travel in the U.S. defense technical community. I was one of the 140 American school children involved, but in that capacity, I became the first American child to Tesla teleport. I also became the first time traveler to be photographed in a photograph in the past from the future. When I went to the past, that was the so-called Josephine Cobb image of Lincoln at Gettysburg on November 19th of 1863. I'm in the foreground of that picture. I also had the cosmic privilege of going back in time and visiting General George Washington in August of 1776 at Brooklyn Heights to advise him to retreat his troops from New York Harbor, which was a mystery, even like when David McCulloch published the book 1776 in 2005. That's a true story, and all I've been doing for the last 20 years is sharing my experiences.
That's fantastic. We're happy you're sharing it with us today. So do we want to get into how the technology works, or would that be a good place?
Well, it's kind of complicated because there were 8 modalities of time travel that we're working with. Perhaps for the purposes of this show, it would just be valuable to state that they were working a lot with 2 technologies. The first was Tesla teleportation. That was found in paperwork left in his apartment at the New Yorker Hotel when he died on January 7th of 1943. It was just captioned energetic array. And in DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, they renamed it Tesla energetic array. So we first started teleporting across the country, in 1967, 68. But then they found a way to adjust the device so that we would arrive in New Mexico from New Jersey, either in what we call the past or future. So the Tesla teleporter began in real time as a real-time device, but then became a time machine. But because if there wasn't a Tesla teleporter in the past, we could get stuck in the past, which was pretty gruesome to contemplate as kids growing up with, lost in space, the notion we would get lost in time. They were also working extensively with the chronovisors developed by Fathers Ernetti and Gemelli at the Catholic University of Milan in the 1940s. So those were the 2 devices I was most extensively involved in, but there were a couple of others as well.
And this journey started with you as a child, which is kind of unusual.
Well, I first teleported across the country from the old Curtiss-Wright Aeronautical Company facility in Woodridge, New Jersey, to Santa Fe, New Mexico, and then drove with my late father, Raymond, to meet with Dr. Harold Agnew, who was then the director of the W Division, the Weapons Division, at the Los Alamos National Labs in Los Alamos, New Mexico, when I was 6, because Dr. Agnew asked my father how old, and my dad and I both answered simultaneously 6. So that meeting had to take place between September 18th of 1967 and September 18th of 1968, because I was born in September 18th of 1961. So we have that as a solid data point. And in that discussion, my dad asked Dr. Agnew, have you tried it yet? Namely, Tesla teleportation. And the person who was destined to become the director of the Los Alamos labs, our leading bomb factory, and had been essentially the quintessential Manhattan Project physicist, said, no, but I want to. And then he would later go to New Jersey with us through, the device. So that pretty much establishes the emergence of teleportation in the U.S. defense technical community. And my dad were very much, involved in that development.
And what year was that? That was 1971?
It had to be between September 18th of 1967 and September 18th of 1968, because when Dr. Agnew asked my father how old in regard to my age, we both said 6. So we know that's a stable data point about what time that was.
Okay. And you weren't the only child participant in this project, right?
No, there were 140 American school children involved, but I went as far down the rabbit hole of applied quantum physics as any child of that era, because I had tested high for both IQ and psychic ability with Project Talent. That was that week of specialized testing in those years, where we would get the 4-colored pen upon the completion of that exam that didn't have a name. And I was also my dad's son, and he'd been involved with the defense technical community going back to the development of the ramjet back in 1952, 9 years before I was born. So I was really lucky because I saw Project Pegasus in a way that most of the other kids in the program did. I would occasionally run into the same kids, but they weren't involved in everything. And I was, because I had scored so high on the standardized testing that they were screening kids with. And my dad was a principal in the project. And I was doing everything they asked me faithfully and well. So I was carried through the whole program.
What made children the ideal candidates for this project?
Well, they were experimentees. They were testing the effects, for example, of Tesla teleportation on children. They were also trainees. They were expecting us to be the first generation of Americans to be trained in time travel from a young age. They were also necessities, because in the case of chronovision, they needed small human beings to not make the holograms that the looking glass devices would generate to go on the fritz. We were also what I call viewies. They knew that children tended to see things more accurately when they were time traveling, because their perceptions were not colored by selection bias from previous experiences. So we were more accurate viewers of what we were time traveling to and seeing. And then I also have invented the phrase sanies, because adults like Navy enlisted personnel were often going insane, shifting from one timeline to another. So those were the 5 reasons kids were being used.
Wow. It's fascinating. And it seems like you encountered some children in the program that people may know their names.
No, I've respected people's privacy. I found the 6 or 7 participants from my elementary school in Morris Plains, New Jersey, which was Mount View Road School, they all remembered some of the time travel, like, for example, the Montauk Chair. But only 2 Mount View graduates remembered teleporting with me to New Mexico. So they clearly were blocked about the most secret activities in the program, which I think was brought about through memory suppression by the government. So it was a bit of a mixed bag when I found kids in the program. But I did find 2 from my immediate group from Mount View Road School who remembered teleporting. And one of them was the boy who lost his feet teleporting to Santa Fe in 1970. So it was all kind of sensitive because I didn't want to violate these people's privacy. They were clearly blocked to some extent. One of them said, well, my wife and I have 8 acres here, as if saying, look, we've been bought off, go away. So it was a bit of a mixed bag talking to my fellow kids in the program. But 2 did confirm remembering not just the Montauk Chair, but the Tesla teleporter.
Can you?
I should add that I found out from a social psychologist that I consulted early in my quest for the truth around the year 2000 by the name of Jean Maria Arrigo, that it is exceptionally difficult to remember something that happens to us that's singular. We have difficulty remembering an alien contact or an encounter with Sasquatch. And in the same way, because we weren't ongoing, what I call chrononauts or time travelers, many of the kids kind of remembered what happened, but not fully. They were sort of blocked.
So it was more the effect of the technology than it was any effort to keep them quiet.
Well, I think it was all 3 of those things. It was the effect of the technology. It was the use of even torture to keep us quiet, which my dad didn't believe was happening, but I knew it was happening. They were like, for example, shocking us ultimately when we would teleport back to New Jersey. And that blocked memory. They used pain induction when we left the program. But the technology was also having effects on our biology that was inimical to memory. But I'm talking about more the fact that when a singular thing happens to you, you can't remember it. And that's why the paranormal is being treated in our time as it is. It's not the paranormal, it's just the exceptional, the singular that can occur to a person. And when that happens, the typical person has great difficulty remembering that singular event. Like if an adult does something very anomalous, they don't remember it, but maybe one of their siblings remembers it. So having been involved in 8 different forms of time travel, I found that my colleagues were both blocked intentionally by the program. They were blocked by the energy patterns that were being generated by the devices and just the actual experience of time traveling, but also because it didn't continue in their life. It was just a forgotten aspect of their childhoods. But fortunately not with all of them, 2 confirmed. And virtually everybody remembered the Montauk Chair.
How did the Montauk Chair work, roughly? What was that?
Well, it wasn't really the only reversed engineered device from ETs. It was the device aboard the ET craft that showed them a quick snapshot of the future so that they wouldn't crash into anything in space. They told us about that fact. And essentially what it did, it was a chair in which you had a kind of an induced out-of-body experience, and you went to like a 15 to 20-minute episode in your own subjective future. But I do remember when I was on Project Pegasus that they found out that essentially every future moment is kind of tripartite in origination, in the sense that when you walk into a hallway, you can go left, right, or not go into the hallway, right? When you pick a college, when you're in high school, you can go to your first college of choice and alternate or decide to do something else with your life, work or go into the military or whatever. So they found the same thing with the Montauk Chair. Every decision we make has implications on a tripartite level. You decide to not take a certain job, you can either remain unemployed or take a different job. So that's what they concluded, that we were seeing things that would happen in our future, that might happen, or that would never happen. And they kind of reached a conclusion that the Montauk Chair was of limited application in terms of predicting the future. Because they would say, okay, what's happening now? And I would say, I'm watching television. Okay, what's on television? The President of the United States. And they'd say, okay, who's the President of the United States? And I'd say, Barack Obama. And and they'd say, what? Because they'd never heard such an exotic name for a U.S. president. So it was sort of like that. They would send us to our subjective futures to collaterally gather information about the future. But then at another time, I would say, they'd say, who's the president on television? I would say John F. Kerry. So that was the timeline in which Kerry won the 2004 election. You see, so they found with the Montauk Chair that it wasn't getting the future, it was getting possible futures on a tripartite basis. It was either the Democrat, the Republican, or some independent. In fact, that was one of the things that convinced me to run in 2016 for president as an independent, because I knew there was going to be more kind of variation to the way we pick president as we did with Mr. Trump, a businessman with no political background. So that's ultimately what they realized the Montauk Chair was about and why it was of limited application. It could identify an actual future, like if it was showing a war, a nuclear mishap or something like that. But even when they got what looked like hard data from a Montauk Chair vision from one of the kids in the program, it wasn't always the future. It was sometimes just a probable future.
So there's infinite timelines potentially, and that would just give you a glimpse into one. Am I processing that properly?
Well, there is a multiplicity of timelines. Project Pegasus proved that. It proved the multiverse, a concept that owes to Henry James, I believe, in the 1880s. For example, when they sent me to Ford's Theater with the express mission of determining who shot President Lincoln, I went to the same night at Ford's Theater, but the small details changed all the time, like who was manning the table at the front of the theater collecting tickets. But it was still the night Lincoln was shot. Our American Cousin, starring Laura Keene, was still on the stage. But they proved that every time they sent the same kid or a different kid to the same location in time via chronovision, that time and place changed a little bit. There was another time when I was driven home from my elementary school after being bused from Curtiss-Wright in Woodridge, New Jersey. And another lady owned and was occupying our house. It wasn't my mom. And I had to live with this strange family for about a week until they were able to contact the right people in the U.S. government who knew how to get me home. Thank God they did, or otherwise I would have had to.
Well, when you were with that family, who did they think you were?
I was telling them who I was, what my name was, my date of birth, and my address, and it was their address.
Wow.
The address, the city, the state, the zip code. And they said, this kid must not be making this up. And I said to them, I'm not making this up. I just teleported from New Mexico, and I was expecting to walk into my family's house here, and you were living here. So something very, very serious has happened. And
Wow.
Thank God they believed me and contacted the Defense Department. And my father was contacted at work, and he got me home. So the implication of that is that by 1971, the U.S. Defense Department was communicating between timelines. So that gave them a pretty advanced mastery of the future.
Wow.
Because they could see what was happening on alternate versions of here.
God, the implications of that are just vast. My God. So what did you experience? What was the process like? How did you enter into this process?
Well, all of the technologies were different. I mean, we were remote viewing for the Office of Naval Intelligence beginning in fall of 1969. I like to say that the kids that became chrononauts for Project Pegasus began as remote viewers for the Office of Naval Intelligence. We were small mediums at large. One of the tasks they had us do for the ONI was look at a picture of Lieutenant Commander John McCain, who would, of course, become the late senior senator from Arizona. His father, of course, was the commander of the Pacific Fleet for the entire U.S. Navy, and he was captive in North Vietnam at the Hanoi Hilton. And they wanted to have us tell them with remote viewing whether he was in the building, this picture of the Hanoi Hilton, and if so, where he was in the building. And we would do similar military assignments for the Office of Naval Intelligence. They were also spinning us to induce out-of-body experiences with kind of like a Twilight Zone spiral on the ceiling. And our head was in the middle of a tabletop-like device. And our hands and feet were fixed to this tabletop-like device, and they would spin us at 33 RPM. And when we would do so, we would leave our bodies and have kind of a form of astral time travel. Then they had us in the Montauk Chair having these kind of OBEs where we would zoom across a plane and collide into the future. And we would be having these snippets of experience from the future. And then they began Tesla teleporting us, which was just a matter of jumping through these armatures or booms that were sort of not lenticular shaped, but kind of C-shaped. They looked kind of like elephant tusks. And when we jumped through those two tusks, this radiant energy would be cascading downward between the tusks. And every 3 inches or so, there would be this bluish green energy signal squiggling across the radiant energy, zooming down. And when we jumped through that field of energy, which we had to do at a meter per second or risk being dismembered, we would find ourselves in a vortal tunnel in time space, which was sort of like a big, sort of almost circular, but sort of in a triangular way. And it was kind of a hologram that we were zooming through in time space. And we would go that 2,005 miles to Santa Fe, New Mexico in a couple seconds, which is still impossible on the basis of contemporary transit technology. So that's what we could have had beginning in around 1970. People could be flying from, let's say, London, England to Sydney, Australia in several seconds rather than 24 hours.
Wow.
But that's been kept back because time travel was weaponized by the Department of Defense upon its emergence. That's one of the reasons I've been speaking out as an environmental lawyer. And then after Tesla teleportation, they began using us in the chronovisor, which were they were kind of big cubes of light. When that cube of light was formed around us, we would experience going to that place that was being fixed in that cube of light. And then there was the plasma confinement chamber, was like a big lucite chamber where there was plasma energy at the end of the chamber. And if we walked into it, we would kind of collapse. We would kind of feel a downward sensation and then be zooming to the left and right, hither and yon, kind of like in that teleportation scene in What the Bleep Do We Know? That was sort of the most violent sensation we got time traveling. But there were, 8 forms of time travel. And because I've been talking about teleportation so much, everybody's concluded that it was time travel based on teleportation, but it was really 8 different modalities of time travel.
Wow.
A quick question. We've heard that in a number of the Hilton hotels that they have these time travel type machines.
Yeah, jump gates.
Yeah. Is that something you're familiar with?
You mentioned hotel. What hotel was that?
Oh, the Hilton. We've heard that at some of the Hilton hotels, in obviously secret locations that had some.
That wasn't in my experience either then or later. I would say that one of their favorite locations, besides just some defense technical building like the General Manufacturing Company in Convent Station, New Jersey, which was like the map making location for Esso, Standard Oil of New Jersey, beginning in like 1923. Or let's say the Morristown, New Jersey Performing Arts Center. One location they really loved was abandoned school sites. So they used like the East Hanover High School when it was shut down. They used the Santa Fe, New Mexico Junior High School when it was being transformed into the Santa Fe County Courts Building in New Mexico. So that was a very favorite place where they would do these experiments with these new time travel devices because children were expected to be seen there. That's why I think they used the Santa Fe State Capitol grounds as the area that they were sending us to via Tesla teleportation rather than the Los Alamos labs, because my dad said they couldn't send us to the Los Alamos labs because somebody there might see something. And we now know there was that KGB infiltration of Lanel by the Klaus Fuchs spy ring of the Soviet Russian government. So they would just send us to the Santa Fe State Capitol grounds. But if a kid ran around a corner of one of those buildings, all of them from different eras of New Mexico history, nobody would notice. They just popped into view there. They would think, oh, there's another kid on a field trip who just decided to run around that building. But they were really fond of abandoned school sites for these experiments. I was in at least two, but I think probably more than that.
And how large? I mean, what would it take to set this up? Is this a lot of equipment? Is it a small amount of equipment? I mean, would it take a number of people, or how would that get set up?
They were all rather small devices. I mean, the cube of light that the chronovisors would generate, also called looking glass devices in the modern instance, but they were primarily called chronovisors or chronovision, were about maybe 20 feet square. The armatures of the Tesla teleporter, there was a crystal array on the ceiling that had bismuth crystals embedded in it. And all they had to do was put an electromagnetic signal through those eight-sided bismuth crystals, and they would generate that cube of light that was 20 feet square. In the case of the teleporters, they were about maybe 8 feet high and maybe 10 feet apart on the ground. So they really weren't that big, and they didn't require that much energy. I think the best example is the Tesla teleporter. Now, that was driving, human beings 2,005 miles across the United States in seconds. But it didn't require a huge amount of energy. It just had the kind of power outlet that you would use, let's say, to power a lathe or a drill press in your home shop. So it was maybe twice what you would use for a kitchen appliance.
And then, as far as the child that had the feet missing, did he or she not go the right speed to get into it, and then the feet were left in one location and the child went to another? Is that correct?
Yeah, we had to train to count on three and leap through the field of energy, the field of radiant energy that was flowing down between the two armatures of the device, the Tesla energetic array, also known as the Tesla teleporter, because we were well aware of the fact that if we didn't, we would be dismembered.
Wow.
It's a hell of a thing.
So my dad spent like an hour training me when I went with him the first time, as did some of the other kids. They would go first with their fathers, who were mobbed up in one way or another with the U.S. government.
So adults were making these trips as well?
Yes, the adults could do most of the things beside, like my dad also went to Gettysburg on the day Lincoln was there with the plasma confinement chamber. He was also teleporting regularly across the country, as was Dr. Sterling Colgate of New Mexico Tech. The real hang up, though, with adults is they could not use them for the chronovisors. They would go on the fritz because the footfall, the voices, a cough, a sneeze, a laugh by an adult would make the holograms go on the blink like an early television set.
And the
So we
hologram,
were necessities.
so the hologram is what the others would visualize on the other side, the representation.
Well, it wasn't a representation. It was taking a part of the quantum hologram and bringing it into the laboratory. So when the hologram came towards us and surrounded us, we went to that part of the quantum hologram, if that makes any sense. It was a time travel device.
So
and that's one problem I have with the current discussion of the looking glass device. The looking glass phrase implied that's all it was a looking glass. And that's not true. It was a going to device. We were going to the past and then ultimately the future via chronovision. In fact, on November 5th of 1971, I and about 4 or 5 other kids went up to ITT Defense in Nutley, New Jersey, and did the first probe to the future via chronovision. And that's where I met the legendary broadcaster Art Bell. And Art acknowledged on his interview with me on August 14th of 2015 that everything checked out. He remembered the time. He was like a 25-year-old technician at ITT Defense while living with his late father in Newark, New Jersey. So that was the probe that pushed chronovision forward. Now that took us a half hour to take a look at the U.S. Supreme Court building. And it was under 100 feet of brackish water. And then we were pulled back for about a half hour. But that probe to the future was very valuable because it told the Defense Department that in a relatively recent or soon to occur future, Washington, D.C. was going to be underwater. But fortunately, that when we were taken back to my learning lab at my elementary school, Mountview, we were told that they had sent us to the future in 2013 to see the effects of the events of 2012. And on that probe, it looked like the Supreme Court building, which is obviously on the mall in the basin that Washington, D.C. is built in. But fortunately, that didn't happen on our timeline. If the solar flares had been a little bit closer to our planet, something like a day of rotation, something like 5 to 6 degrees closer to our planet, we would have had a massive human, die out from flooding, because something like 70% of humanity lives within a 1-hour car drive of an ocean. So we would have lost most of what then was like 6 billion human beings on Earth. Fortunately, we didn't. So then again, that was another incident where they were focusing on a future, and it was a future we came very close to living out, but didn't live out.
Wow.
As far as looking glass, I believe that I've heard you talk about that the crucifixion of Christ has been witnessed. Is that something that you could go into more detail on?
Well, at Sandia in the summer of '72, my dad, working with his team, working for DARPA, chronovised, as we say, chronovised images of Jesus's ministry, crucifixion, and resurrection. Now, when I say that, people say, well, you didn't see that, or you're proselytizing. And I say, in fact, we weren't allowed to see the scenes of the resurrection, probably because it was they made a decision to classify it under the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment, that the U.S. government shall not establish a religion. That's my theory of why they would have blocked that. My dad did see it, and he was a man of truth and honor. And he told myself and an old friend of his, Connie Chavez, who lived in Old Town Albuquerque. She and I joined him on that trip to Sandia and saw scenes of Jesus's ministry and crucifixion. And it was hideous. We had difficulty watching it. And as we were leaving the auditorium, where this sort of 20-minute black and white film of a chronovized holographic rendering of Jesus, the events of Jesus' life, were shown, my dad said, "Connie, I don't know why you're acting like that," because she was like literally hiding her face from the 16 millimeter film screen that was showing us these chronovized moving images of Jesus' life. And Connie said, "How do you think I should act, Ray? They were crucifying my Lord. It was hideous." And I certainly agreed with her. I actually almost felt that evil was in the center of the room and it was almost making like a sound like locusts, and it was very evil to be watching the hideous torture of Jesus upon his crucifixion. And my dad said, I know, it was difficult to watch, but you'd have nothing to worry about, because we also have images that 3 days later, 2 angels appear in Jesus' crypt. Jesus stands up with a flash of light, and they help Jesus move the stone away from his crypt, and they all 3 of them walk out of his crypt. So what I find objectionable as an American constitutional scholar and a protege of Norman Cousins, of course, who wrote the brilliant book In God We Trust, is that there is no argument, regardless of what people's religious belief was, which I also respect the fact that we're a polytheistic nation and people have a right to believe what they want. But there's really no dispute following Cousins proving it. Cousins, a Jew who was sort of ecumenical enough to write about the founders, that with the exception of Ben Franklin, the founders were all evangelical Christians. And I find it a mistake that DARPA and the intel community and the other agencies that had a need to know this stuff, many of the people in those agencies became even sort of sovereign Christians who believed that Christianity should be our national religion, and we should get rid of the free exercise clause of the First Amendment. But I don't agree. I think they should have told the people that they had images of the resurrection, because we all ultimately resurrect. And I think people are troubled by the alternate sort of Darwinian view, the sort of skepticist view that we're all obliterated upon physical death. We are not. In fact, DARPA told the kids in Project Pegasus that, and regressed each of us to one past life. So Jesus's resurrection was his permanent resurrection, his permanent ascension. But we are all resurrected into later lives and ultimately ascension. And I think that it was not the right decision that our government decided to conceal that discovery, which my dad and his colleagues made. I'm quite proud of what he did as an applied scientist, and that he was a very devout Catholic who did it, because it's true. It happened. And in fact, even before I was allowed to see those images of Jesus, I was told that I would resurrect in a future life after dying in this life. So I had nothing to worry about. And that was done in 1970 when I was 9 years old. So I don't think that DARPA or the DOD would be sending some bright, intelligent people to Mount View Road School in Morris Plains, New Jersey, just to convince some New Jersey school children that they were going to have future lives after physical death in this life, unless it was true. Why would they be doing that? I mean, that would be rather, I don't know, rather advanced for children to even be considering. And yet they did that in fall of 1970. So that's what I think people have a right to know. I believe in the truth, and I believe it will set people free. In the case of telling people the truth, that they don't die, that their bodies die, but their spirits don't, it would free them, for example, of mortal dread. of being obliterated upon physical death, and all of the sin and the dysfunction that they commit in this life when they don't believe in eternity. But eternity is reality, just like our ability to fly planes is now reality since the Wright brothers. And I think that was a mistake to have blocked the American people from knowing that. Look at all the dysfunction we're seeing in contemporary society. I don't want to mention anything in particular, but I think we would all agree that there's a craziness in society where people aren't remembering that their spirit cannot die, and they should worry about everything they do. It has a significance, has a consequence to their fate as spirits. And that has been blocked to the American people, despite the fact that they know that Jesus resurrected. They were convinced, all of us do. I don't know all of the means they used to determine that, but they told me that when I was 9 years old. And I did find out that I was Ebenezer Snell, the first graduate of Amherst, which kind of explains why I became a career student in this life, with five post-secondary credentials. But they even knew who I was in a former life. They also held that back from the American people. But they did so despite the fact that the United States of America was founded as a project by a group of Christians who knew they would die if they didn't win the revolution. And so they were very courageous individuals and very idealistic and very Christian. And so I'm not proselytizing when I'm saying that. I know that that's a statement that would please a Tucker Carlson or a Franklin Graham, but that is reality. Take a look at, for example, Washington's Thanksgiving proclamation. It is a prayer by an evangelical Christian. So I'm a little bit disturbed that DARPA had images of Jesus's resurrection and somebody convinced them to hold it back from the American people. Probably some constitutional scholar or, I don't know, Ted Hesburgh of Notre Dame or somebody that, oh no, you can't bring people to the Lord through cinema. It's got to be through faith. Well, I'm sorry. It would have been through cinema and it would have been the truth. Jesus resurrected.
Wow.
And my dad saw it. My dad filmed it.
Now,
Wow.
it would appear that the linearity of time is largely illusory. And I've heard you talk about this to a significant degree. How does it really work?
Well, that's a complex question.
It is.
We are spirits on an ascension timeline, so that what there is a multiplicity of dimensions that are temporary externalizations of heaven that individual spirits are sent to. So, for example, in one of my lives, I was a young man named Robbie Brown in England from about 1850 to maybe 1920 at the latest. But I also had other lives on that timeline. So the timelines are a multiplicity of environments, of chronological environments. So you can be, for example, a black jazz musician during the heyday of jazz in the 1920s and come back as another black jazz musician or as a white jazz musician in the 1920s. In other words, all of these realms that we're sent to are externalizations of heaven, and they're multiplicitous. So it's really not even accurate to speak of the multiverse. I would favor, like Weber's term, the omniverse, because it even relates to our various lives. So there's a multiplicity of such environments. That, I think, is the best way to explain how time works. It's multiplicitous, diverse, and it's germane to the percipient, us. That explains the controversy over the flat Earth and the round Earth. I loved the broadcaster Randy Morgan's explanation that in the final analysis, it's neither round nor flat. It's a realm that our spirit is visiting in a particular lifetime. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Especially with the way he's
Yeah.
described it. Yeah, thank
That's
you.
how I answered that question when Joe asked me. So yeah, I'd say it makes a lot of sense.
So I had a quick, so you said that you were able to see at least one past life, and now I believe I'm hearing two. Where, I guess one question is how many past lives are you aware of, and where is it?
I've remembered clearly about 20, and I've written an extensive book about it. It's about as many chapters. It's like 21 or 22 chapters. What I'm saying is, I think the American people have a right to know that by 1970, the American government was certain that we do not die, and was teaching a small group of New Jersey school children that, probably all of the 140 kids in Pegasus around the country. I can't see why they held that back, given the costs of people embracing certain beliefs and certain concepts of rightful or wrong conduct, where they're not even considering the fact that karma exists, or, sin and being punished or having to relive some aspect of life to get it right exists. Okay, that's we're awaiting on the path to ascension. Jesus ascended permanently because he was without fault. He was without sin. He finally got it right. He was the firstborn of the undead. So at first, I'm concerned that they knew that by 1970, and then by summer of 72, had footage of Jesus's resurrection as a particular human being who not only reached heaven, he didn't have to be born again,
Right.
but he was ascended in every way when he came back, right? He was eternal. He existed as a light form in terms of his body, but it was a pattern of light rather than a pattern of flesh and blood. And he didn't experience death or pain because he was without fault. That is potentially the destiny of all of us. And they chose not to tell the American people that. I think they would kind of get their acts together and not be doing so many sadistic and dysfunctional things if they could learn that. And I believe they have a human right to have been told that by the U.S. government.
Oh,
they told me.
Absolutely.
Why was I any more special than my contemporaries?
Right. Well, my question is this, and thank you for making that clear. When we are in the interim between lives, do you have any insight for the viewers on what that is, what we're doing, how long that is in general? Like, I'm trying to get some clarity on that topic, if that makes sense.
I know we go back to a light pattern. I was told by a CIA agent who worked with me on both Pegasus and Project Mars, Courtney M. Hunt, who was also a writer and sort of an intellectual and kind of an unusual guy. He might have been like the inspiration for the cigarette smoking man from the CIA and the X-Files.
Yeah.
But Courtney told me that the Polaris constellation is heaven. You know how there's always been that kind of weird dichotomy between the heavens and heaven? Yeah. Well, it turns out that one constellation in the heavens has been known by the U.S. government as literally being heaven. So when we get in a car accident or die from cancer, whatever befalls us in this particular life, we start zooming through time and space towards a particular constellation. I remember doing that in past lives, between past lives. So presumably that could have been telling me that reality, that it's the Polaris constellation, but it is a constellation of light. And there, our immediate past life, in comparisons with other past lives, is evaluated, and there's a decision of whether we've graduated and we're ready for ascension, or we got to go back again and get something right. Most of us go back again. I think that I was told by 3 ascended beings that I met in 1968, again when I was 7 or so, maybe it was because I was time traveling, I don't know, that we basically are, live again about 10,000 lives and then reach ascension. So in that place, we're not tortured, we're not sent to hell. We're basically in like a seminar where we reflect on how we lived. Did we learn how to learn? Did we learn how to love? Were we kind to other people? Were we loving? Were we just? Were we fair? Were we everything? Joyous, long-suffering, all the fruits of the Spirit. And if we weren't, they send us back to focus on that, on that shortcoming. In my past life, I was a very humanitarian diplomat, and they sent me back to learn compassion. And I said, how can you be doing this? I mean, I just died fighting for a peace accord in a particular area of the world as an international diplomat and humanitarian. How else could I prove compassion by doing that? And they said, yes, but you were always trying to show yourself being compassionate. We want you to start revealing mere compassion. And I've done that several times in this life. I did that when I saved Bernard Mendez's life on Mars. And I helped a girl at Cal Poly walk when she had a Charlie horse in the school library. So there have been times in life where, without any thought for showing off my compassion, I was just compassionate. I hope I make the grade this lifetime when I die and I'm evaluated, because I think I've made the grade, but I don't know.
Wow. I gotta ask, we definitely need to get into Mars. That's that's essential.
Nice segue.
But I have to ask, there was a conversation that occurred between Judge Napolitano and Donald Trump regarding the release of the JFK file. And Trump has always been a proponent of releasing the file in full. It's the right of the people to know. But when it came down to it, he said he saw what was in the file and he just couldn't. And Napolitano said, you absolutely have to. And he said, if you saw what was in the file, you would understand. I can't. What do you suppose might be in that file?
That was a real difficult question. I mean, I worked with one of JFK's speechwriters, Norman Cousins, for 3 years, 1986, 7, and 8. And I actually found documents in his house-sized office behind his house in Los Angeles that revealed that essentially JFK was killed for essentially adopting the Norman Cousins position on the threat of nuclear weapons. Now, of course, there have been other theories, like he had a debate with MJ-12 over the alien presence, that he had 32 girlfriends and a boyfriend, in addition to his wife, Jacqueline Bouvier Kennedy, as a lover. So there's been a lot that's come out about JFK in Michael Sala's book, Kennedy's Last Stand, Seymour M. Hersh's book, The Dark Side of Camelot. But I would say, based on the research I did for 3 years with Cousins, I ended up doing a 777-page oral history of Cousins. And I did several sessions with Norman about JFK and his assassination. He sent me to talk to a young history graduate student in Los Angeles who would become a leading JFK assassination researcher. And that individual put me under hypnosis with this pen-like device and quizzed me for about a half hour. And when I mentioned that to Vince Bugliosi in 2014, about a year before Vince died, Vince, of course, being the author of Reclaiming History, pinning everything on Oswald, he told me, despite his thesis in his book, Reclaiming History, pinning it all on Lee Harvey Oswald, that all of the major JFK assassination researchers have been Army intelligence. So I don't know. I think the ultimate explanation for President Kennedy's untimely death may be quite frightening. Maybe creatures from outer space killed him with some advanced device from space, or living underground, or in another dimension, or something like that. Because the bottom line is, even when they start to claim named shooters with named timers in named locations, the Daltex building or what have you, Texas School Book Depository. It's all up to dispute, and it's been a real long time. It's going to be 60 years this year. It's my first memory. I was 6 years, 2 months, and 4 days old when President Kennedy was killed. I remember my dad going across to our neighbor, Frank Connor's house, and saying, "I just feel so sorry for his family." So the Kennedy assassination is my first public memory, and I find it peculiar that after 60 years it remains unproved, because I thought I had pretty much established by going through Cousins' paperwork that, the fact that General Curtis LeMay wanted 10,000 Minuteman missiles and President and Attorney General Robert Kennedy, his brother, wanted 100 Minuteman missiles, and they settled for 900. 900 is only 9% of 10,000. So it's clear that the Kennedy brothers had a major fight with the Hawks, embodied in LeMay, on the very issue of nuclear weapons. When I met Senator Alan Cranston when I was at UCLA in the 1980s, he told me that after President Kennedy's death, when they got that settlement of only 900 Minuteman missiles, one U.S. nuclear submarine had the destructive capability, if a Hiroshima-style bomb was blown up every day for 13 years. That was Hiroshima times 4,750. One submarine. So the Kennedy brothers lost the quest to make this a safer world. They were essentially, I thought at least Jack Kennedy was a nuclear Christ figure by opposing the Hawks. But when I heard of President Trump's statement to Andrew Napolitano, I'm thinking maybe what it was something almost unexplainable, like some advanced device fired by some extraterrestrials or interdimensionals or something that strange. I think he was very sexually active, and we can't rule out that it could have been that that husband of that woman he got involved with, Mary Pinchot Meyer, Cord Meyer. But Cord Meyer was a world federalist, and he favored JFK's ban the bomb kind of sentiments by 1963, embodied in the American University speech, which I proved Cousins wrote 21 major parts of. The American University speech of June 10, 1963, by President Kennedy, was the work of Norman Cousins. So that's as far as JFK went from being nominated as president to the last year of his life and his presidency, 1963. He went from talking of the Soviet Union as enemy campfires burning on distant hillsides to talking in terms of what kind of peace do we seek, not a Pax Americana enforced on the world by American weapons of war. That was Cousins. And other humanitarian ecumenical peace activists like Grenville Clark and Alan Cranston and Kingman Brewster of Columbia University. In other words, Kennedy became a ban the bomb advocate by the last year of his presidency. And I believe that's why he got killed. Maybe being aware of his desire to be president, President Trump said that to Andrew Napolitano, who, by the way, I was thinking of asking to be my running mate. I was thinking of the 2 Andes ticket in 2016, but I couldn't get to him. I certainly have respect for him and for President Trump.
I was
I
deferred.
want to talk about President Trump, but maybe he was just reading the documents that would have endangered our nuclear preparedness if it was revealed that Kennedy was killed because he rejected the doctrine of mutually assured destruction, because, man, we're living under it, unfortunately.
Yeah,
I don't think it's going to happen as long as sane leaders are elected the leaders of major countries. You know, the United States, Russia, China, and so forth, Japan, India, South Africa, and Israel, and the other countries that now have the bomb. But Kennedy became a ban the bomb advocate in a way that still has not been publicized. So maybe being more politic, President Trump concluded that that was the safest thing to do, is not reveal that Kennedy was killed because he wanted to ban the bomb, which clearly would have put us at risk of destruction by a Russia or China that wasn't going to see the light and do that, right? Maybe he wanted peace, but just as with Cousins and Cranston and the rest of them, didn't realize it had to be peace on both sides rather than unilateral disarmament. Now, they weren't calling for that, but I think that their sentiment was had a little bit of the danger of assuming that other world powers were going to do that and ban the bomb.
Yeah, I've always
That's
thought
why I never became a world federalist after working with Cousins. I never bought their belief. I do think that heuristically and realistically, it would be something that would protect all of our lives if we did bomb nuclear weapons around the world. The problem I see is getting everybody to cooperate. We can't even get China, for example, to cooperate with its 40-year-old plan to take our country. So I'm sorry to say, I think that the peace advocates and the world federalists were wrong. They had an idealistic streak and a love for humanity that in some way blinded their countrymen and women from the truth, which is not everybody around the world is as nice as Americans. And on that basis, I would embrace continuing mutually assured destruction if I was elected.
I've always felt that it had something to do with the UFO file, but there's a narrative that has been around for quite a while that other dimensional beings were affected by what happened at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and that there was an intervention, potentially disabling all nuclear weapons. There's different versions of that narrative.
Well, that could have been it too. I mean, because we know that the 1947 saucer flap was focused on Oak Ridge, Tennessee, where there was a nuclear enrichment plant, Hanford, Washington, where there was a nuclear waste repository, and Roswell, New Mexico, famous Roswell incident, which had the only nuclear-equipped Air Force squadron in the country. I always forget what it is now. I think it was the 509th. So that's very conspicuous. Now, clearly, when you start blowing up 2,000 nuclear weapons in 40 years all over the planet, you're sending destructive results into space that would come to the attention of humanoids living there. And I believe that did happen. I mean, for every action, there's an opposite and opposing reaction. So when those nuclear weapons zoomed into space with all that destructiveness, opposite signals, dark matter, well, bless you, dark matter was sent in the opposite direction. So clearly, creatures advanced enough to speed here in their lifetimes would know about such, holes being blown in the universe, in space, holes being blown in space.
Now you talked about
maybe what
where that did happen, I believe, where there was a mass detonation of nuclear weapons.
Did I talk about that?
I thought I remember you talking about that there was some alternative timeline.
No, I talked about the fact that the connection between nuclear weapons and extraterrestrials, which I argued for 50 years, and I was happy to see Richard Dolan mentioning on a recent episode of his UFO program on cable. I think it's called the UFO Story or something like that. That has always been one of the problems of dealing with either the nuclear arms race on the one hand or alien contact on the other. Certainly in the early 70s, the Department of Defense, the military, didn't know who the ETs were, where they were from, or what they wanted. But gradually over time, they were becoming aware of why they were visiting, and that was because we were blowing up nuclear weapons. So I think it's possible that that's what Mr. Trump decided to block from the people, and Judge Napolitano disagreed. And I think it's something that reasonable people can disagree about. But I don't think that President Kennedy adopting the ban the bomb movement would have necessarily made us any safer. I think it might have jeopardized us, not from extraterrestrials or interdimensionals, but from quite human beings on this planet who have been unkind even to their own citizens.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. So I think we have to reason our way to positive change. We have to say, okay, if we do this, what's likely to happen? If we were to ban the bomb, as Cousins and Cranston and Kingman Brewster and Grenville Clark and all those anti-nuclear weapon activists of the 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s until they sponsored the nuclear freeze in California in 1982, there'd be consequences. We would be disarmed in an armed world. So I think that by convincing President Kennedy of the need to do that, they were doing something very provocative. I don't think the Hawks were right, because I think we should have tried to disarm with the cooperation of other world powers. But it began kind of accelerating as a policy initiative under President Kennedy. And that is, I believe, why he was killed. But I hold out the possibility that Dr. Sala is right, and that it was the extraterrestrial presence and Kennedy's desire to talk about it, maybe even talk about it in light of the nuclear weapons connection to its origination, that may have caused his, what they viewed as his need to be taken out.
It seems like a great segue.
But we don't know. After 60 years, we don't know. So it's got to be something troubling. It's got to be something weird and disconcerting, or I don't see a realist like President Trump sharing that with a brilliant realist like Judge Napolitano.
Agreed.
And by the way, let me just brag about this a little bit. Do you know what happened in, let's see, what was that? Mid-December of 2015, that began President Trump's turnaround, where he was 30 points down in the poll, and then he just started improving.
Did you maybe have something to do with it?
Yes. I'm doing this because I think someday I'm going to meet President Trump.
Yeah.
What happened is I announced for president, not for him being president, but for me being president, I announced my independent campaign on December 19th of 2015. And I was asked, what do you think of Donald Trump? And I said, first thing out of my mouth was, well, he's certainly a remarkable American. And I'm a truth advocate. So if I go to Las Vegas and I see a building on it with Trump on it rather than Basiago or Rodham Clinton, okay, I think that's grounds to conclude that Donald Trump is a remarkable American. You remark about what you've seen that you want to tell somebody else about. Oh, so you go to Las Vegas and you say, I went to Trump Towers and it was incredible, or whatever. I then spoke of him as Donald Trump and the 12 Dwarfs, namely the other Republican candidates, because that's how all the debates were going. So I just want President Trump to know that began his turnaround. I think I mentioned that to him when I wrote him on July 28th of 2020. But that was a true story, President Trump. That began your turnaround. Perhaps you can now give me the Space Medal of Honor I was promised by the CIA for saving a fellow American astronaut's life on the Red Planet, for even going there. But I'm still waiting for your response. That began your turnaround in 2016.
We're honored that you're mentioning that on our show, and in the likelihood that could get back to him.
He's watching. He's watching.
Well, I figured you guys were Trumpers, but let me say something about that. I'm not a Trumper, but I'll tell you this: he has been evaluated unfairly, as I have, and in that sense, not evaluated truthfully. He's not a Bidenista, and I could go into that in a whole show, but President Trump had 4 peace successes. He should have won the Nobel Peace Prize for his successes.
Yep.
He has been doing his own thinking rather than partisanship.
Yep.
He improved our position in a number of treaties that were unfavorable. He was realistic about the cause of COVID-19 having originated in China. He was aware of the danger to us posed by 4 factions: the Chinese, Western Satanists, British technocrats, and Zionists. He was realistic about our need to protect illegal migration from south of the Rio Grande with the wall. I think that President Trump is possibly the most successful American president who has been evaluated as a bad president. I think he was a good president in terms of his successes. If people don't like his personality, well, that's tough. Everybody's got a personality. I mean, he's from New York. I have a New Jersey, California personality, right? But because that's where I've lived most of my life. But I think he's been treated unfairly. And I'm not really even speaking to this recent prosecution, although it includes it. Even before he left office, he was never being evaluated honestly and truthfully, fairly. And I just want to say that because that's my belief. And I want President Trump to know that there are many Americans who appreciate the excellent job he did as president. It was an amazing performance. And I think I kind of got confused on the Trumper angle, right? Because I was one of the leaders of the Truth Movement and I ran. And I thought, well, all these Trumpers have become, all these truthers have become Trumpers. Well, no, Trump was a truther. That's what I missed. Right. And that's because I was so busy running and continuing my activities in the Truth Movement. I really didn't have time to get a good fix on Mr. Trump when he was running. But I now realize that all of those truthers who became Trumpers realized that Mr. Trump was a truther.
An outsider.
He certainly was. He was an outsider and he was a truther. He was evaluating his and arriving at his beliefs based on his findings rather than his findings based on his beliefs. That's the problem with Americans of all parties, of all mental states, sane or crazy. And we're seeing a lot of crazies. We have to evaluate our beliefs based on our findings. We have to be realists about what our findings are and what they mean. And the more and more I learn about Mr. Trump and his 4 years in office, I'm convinced that that's why he had a realistically successful presidency.
Yeah, I don't know that I wouldn't want to speak for Joe, but I wouldn't consider myself a Trumper so much. I haven't seen a political party that I would want to be affiliated with solely, but his opposition.
I'd like to get rid of the parties, but restore the constitutional.
His opposition to what it has become, it would seem that it's inherently corrupt and more of a corporate structure than any kind of nation state at this point. And I think his commitment to the restoration of what was once a beautiful vision for this country is a great reason to be an advocate.
Who else is there?
Right.
In other words, I wasn't really I wasn't really that eager to say something so expansive about Mr. Trump. I really wanted him to know that I sparked his turnaround in late 2015. But I do think that if we're going to understand where we've been, we have to be truthful. We have to be honest. And I just wanted everybody to think that it was my analysis that he had a successful presidency because he was a truther as much as he was a Trumper himself. And see, his critics kept on claiming that, well, he's this or that, that's doing this or that. And they were never focusing on the fact that he was arriving at his analysis of the truth realistically and arriving at effective proposals and solutions. And that is what we should always be doing, regardless of who's elected.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say that that's what motivated me, because at first I am like, I didn't understand why he was tweeting, etc. But when I saw the amount of hate towards him, and then I saw the executive orders, about the human trafficking and those affiliated with it will remove their assets. Their assets will be removed. It kind of blew my mind, and I looked at had a whole paradigm shift in how I looked at what he was doing, and I think he's just getting started. When people find out the truth, because we have people on our show that aren't necessarily fans of Trump for one reason or another, but I think when the truth comes out about what he's really been doing, it is going to blow our minds, and I think he's just getting started.
Yeah, I think there's
right, and also it's always a choice, and somebody's got to have that job. And I just want everybody to evaluate the job that he did for those 4 years when evaluating whether to vote for him again, because I think that they'll find some surprises that have been kept back from them.
Agreed.
By the mainstream media, for example, but also from those who just didn't like him. And that's just not a fair evaluation. I think a fair evaluation of Mr. Trump shows that he had a quite successful presidency, and it would certainly be superior to have an undemented, sane president rather than the current choice.
Well, and he seems to be beyond just being an individual. I mean, no individual necessarily is gonna save the world, so to speak. Correct the wrongs of what's going on right now. But it would appear that he's part of a larger organization or a larger plan that does have those aspirations in mind. And that's,
does it involve a press secretary that doesn't bite us in the neck when she's speaking?
Oh, she's delightful, isn't she?
Anyway, I'm pretty burned out on the Bidenistas at this point. I think they've been perhaps the worst administration that we've ever had, certainly in modern times.
Well, that's such an obvious thing. The guy he's clearly demented.
Well, wait, I gotta ask, do you think that that's still Biden, or do you think that's some kind of person that's portraying Biden? I just gotta ask.
I think it's still him, and that Jill Biden should apologize to all of us for letting him run. She must have known, as his wife of many years, that he had hit the curve as an elderly person, and he should have respectfully been allowed to retire and just live a quiet life, doing watercolors or fishing or something relaxing that I'd like to do when retired, fully. I just think that he's not fit to lead this country. I think his choice for vice president was strange. I think she's a strange person.
Right.
She's cackling at weird moments. I think his press secretary is frightening. And I think every decision that comes from him seems to be inimical to our well-being. I'm concerned.
Right. Well, and as someone that is, with time travel and a lot of the things that are going on behind the scenes, I'm sure you're familiar with, either body doubles or clones or CGI and all this stuff. And so I guess. Well,
I think that sort of urban legend that Donald Marshall started by talking about the cloning that's going on. I'm not sure I believe that. And I think the original term for clone was like when you got a 9-foot tall American who looked just like, let's say, Bill Clinton, and yet wasn't 6'1" or 6'2", but 9 feet tall. Not 9 feet tall, but 5'9", I meant to say. Okay. And they were using the term clone within the Secret Service. Well, we've got a clone, a body double for this president, this first lady or vice president or whoever. I don't think they mastered instantaneous cloning, because after all, a clone is an identical twin separated in time. And the literature of Donald Marshall suggests instantaneous cloning. Maybe because I know they're 200 years more advanced in the area of time travel and Mars visitation, and the things I was led into and have talked about for 20 years, that it could be possible that they have instantaneous cloning.
Well,
if they do, they're using it, but I'm not convinced they have it.
Right. Well, the clone, someone can be, from our understanding, someone could be, created and then put in utero. Hence, I believe that might be what Kurt Cobain was referring to in the second album. And then they grow up, and their DNA is then now ages like a normal human. But then there's a cloning center that Britney Spears referred to, and was it Breaking the Glass or something like that, where they're clones that are grown in I believe roughly a 5 to 6 month time period. So that's another thing. So as far as instantaneous, I've not heard of that, but I think as far as the most instant clones, they're grown in a roughly a 6 month time period. I could be give or take.
And about 6 months ago, there was that German discovery was announced of sort of artificial wombs. So I think it's all possible. I just don't know if it's happening. I think that it's more on the urban legend side than the urban fact side, even for my comfort factor. I just haven't been convinced of it. I think that it is the original Joe Biden, and that he is demented from age and probably from experience.
But those earlobes,
we all get impacted by it.
I mean,
those factors.
The earlobes tell a different story, don't they?
I can't see them, so I can't speak to that. But I'll take other people's conclusion that his earlobes are different. Yeah, possibly. It certainly seems like a different person.
Yeah. Well, we could segue on to Mars, perhaps. Yeah.
Right. We've only got you for so much time, and
thank you for your insight.
I really want to dig in.
Please.
Yeah. So Mars, what can you tell us about Mars? We've got Elon Musk and a bunch of other billionaires on a quest to get there. A lot of testimony that people have already been there via portal. It's as easy as walking through a door. We had Alex Jones talking about slave colonies on Mars. We've had stories of the Nazis building bases on Mars. Or Nazis actually originating from Mars. A lot of different lore, a lot of stories. What can you tell us about Mars, having been there?
It's not a place I would like to return to. It's very much what Richard Hoagland has described as a vast, muddy wasteland. But I disagree as a result of experience and analysis of the Mars pictures from NASA. It's an inhabited, vast, muddy wasteland. It has 5 humanoid species, including 2 very much like us, 3 not like us, and about 30 major land animals. And it's an inhabited planet. And that fact is being concealed for nefarious reasons, probably to save the Windsor's royalties on the King James Version of the Bible, depicting this planet as the only inhabited planet, as the center of existence, as it were. Not true. Mars is inhabited. I've been there. I've run from predators on the surface. I saw 2 of my fellow chrononauts killed on the surface. One bitten in half and one just sort of bitten on the stomach. I went there about 20 times between July of 1981 and August of 1984. Of course, when I first remember my Mars memories, I just remember my first 2 trips up there. But I've now remembered virtually everything I did via what was known as aeronautical repositioning chamber, or ARC. That was the technical term for the space elevator or jump rooms. They were under the direction of Howard Robard Hughes, the legendary aviator. He had an office on the 4th floor of 999 North Sepulveda in El Segundo, California. My knowledge of the personality and characteristics of Howard Hughes has been confirmed as something only somebody who worked with them could know by Major General Mark Music, the co-author of the excellent biography of Hughes, Boxes, The Secret Life of Howard Hughes. Major General Music has written the foreword to my memoir about Project Mars, which I hope to publish when I can figure out how to publish it and still have $1 million given to me by the US government to undergo dialysis 3 times a week. But it will happen, even if it has to be after my death. But they're lying about Mars, and I'm mystified why this continues. I think that I've kind of pieced together that we were going to Mars because the moon was occupied, and that with Apollo 17, we were driven off the moon. So we sought the high ground and a presence on Mars. I kind of doubt the theories of a huge German presence on Mars, or a significant one, because the only foreign nationals I met on the surface of Mars, in person, by accent, by the insignia of their cultures, was British and Russian, Soviet Russian. In fact, one of the Russian astronauts I saw looked a lot like Putin. He was at the back of the line of Russians that we crossed paths with on the surface. So I'm a little bit leery of the German fervor that we've heard from people in the SSP literature, Secret Space Program literature. I believe that it began with Clark McClellan. Clark McClellan was a colleague and ally of Richard Hoagland, who, when I came forward, said I wasn't even a real person. I was a CIA legend named quote unquote Basiago, which he spelled in down style, and denied my humanity, despite the fact that my academic and legal credentials and name and address and phone number and date of birth and everything were on the internet. So I don't know how he could have figured I was not a real person. But I doubt the veracity of Clark McClellan, who my information suggests started the theory that there was a substantial German or Nazi presence on Mars. I didn't see any in 20 visits. I didn't see Prussian eagles or swastikas. I wasn't told in my training that you might be meeting Germans on the surface. I was told, as did happen, you might be meeting British and Soviet Russian astronauts or chrononauts on the surface. I once met a group of Russians and a number of times met a group of British. In fact, one of them was shooting up every life form that he could find there with his pistol. And we put in a complaint about him, but there was no German presence there. So I doubt this school of thought that I've called Germania, almost sarcastically. It wasn't there. It's part of the mythification potential of the internet, the blogosphere, I think. I don't know what Dr. Sala's motive is for advancing it. I think that he's been rather disingenuous in terms of telling me that he doesn't believe a number of people have come forward, including Randy Kramer. But what do you know? After telling me that, he goes on the air and cites somebody like that as an authority. So I just want everybody to know that I've always told the truth about Mars and time travel, and began the literature of the secret space program, at least after Michael C. Ralph and Arthur Neumann had come forward in 1999 and 2006, respectively. I then came forward in 2009, in August of 2009, at James Gilliland's property in Trout Lake, Washington. And I'm very disturbed that a set of myths and urban legends have entered the literature of the secret space program. We had at least 5 guys come forward who were telling the truth: Basiago, Stillings, Mendez, White Crow, and Johnston, and possibly 7, including the earlier revelations of Ralph and Neumann. And I was just disturbed how by 2013, the Randy Kramers and Corey Goods began making up accounts based on our accounts. The more exotic, the more incredible the claims, the better. Kind of one-upmanship. But the problem was those who were seeking one-upsmanship were not telling the truth. Whereas at least those 5 that I mentioned, possibly the first 7, were telling the truth. Notice how the first 7, Ralph through Johnston, all talked about the jump room. Why would they have to go through some other technology once the jump rooms existed? They wouldn't need rockets or space planes to get to Mars, millions of miles away, when they were sending us in 20 minutes via the Ark. So why are they talking about space plane or rocket at all? But that's and why did they never say where they took off from Earth? But really start to scrutinize the literature of the secret space program, whoever it is, the alleged super soldiers like James Rink and James Casbolt, or Corey Goode and Randy Kramer, or Tony Rodriguez, or whoever.
I think Corey Goode is regarded as somewhat of a charlatan across the board by now, is he not?
Yeah, but to suggest that 3 or 4 years ago was anathema to the truth movement. It was anathema to the evolving literature of the secret space program, because those who were making up their accounts were distorting what I had made such a significant contribution to. It was my life's work. Still is. So in other words, I just want you to be discerning and recognize that a group of opportunists, delusionals, and disinformants came along. I call them the odd. And how come they never talk about the Ark and the space elevators or jump rooms? They never mentioned me. They never mentioned the 2 gentlemen who I affirmed and the 4 other gentlemen who I knew were on the surface with me or trained with me, or both. But all 4 of those individuals, Stillings, Mendez, Whitecrow, and Johnston, I had contact with, or specific mission assignments on the surface of the red planet between 1981 and 84. Why did they never mention me? Was I ever discredited? No. So why are they trying to discredit me? I mean, think, people, why would that be necessary? If you're one of these secret space program claimants, don't you want to be believed? Don't you want to mention everybody who's credible? I have. I mentioned Kramer and Corey Goode as recent as the MUFON Symposium in 2017. What, 6 years ago, five years ago, in real time. And I regret doing that, because I always believe that they were probably not telling the truth, and it's been proven in the fullness of time. I mean, Kramer's given 2 different names, Deirdre and Doris, for the wife who supposedly died on his arms on Mars. Are you telling me that your wife is going to die? Your wife is going to die in your arms from a predator attack on another planet? Those 4 conditions are going to be present, and you're going to forget her first name? I'm sorry, I just don't think that's credible. And Kramer stated that to me personally. Well, he told Dr. Sala in 2014 that the wife who was killed by a predator and died in his arms on Mars was Deirdre. At a conference in Yelm, Washington in 2017, he couldn't give me the name of anybody he knew on the red planet. And then when I asked him the same question in 2020 on Martian Revelation by Gary Legier, the Mad Martian, he just quickly said, Doris. I'm sorry, that was the end of Kramer's credibility.
Yeah.
And it looks like Randy was introduced to take the attention off of Andy, just as I'd always suspected, but I didn't want to be accused of being arrogant or self-righteous. So this is a mess now. The truth movement has been damaged by infiltration by liars.
Yeah.
So please wake up if you're a fan of the literature of the secret space program. It's been distorted in this way.
The loudest voices in ufology are CIA. I mean, it's kind of crazy. But let's talk about your.
A lot of people at NASA. Oh, yeah, a lot of people at NASA have been lying.
Not a space.
I'm going to be doing work on that.
Yeah. But I do want to hear more about ARC and how did you end up there and yeah, tell us the story.
Well, what we would do is we would, in the middle part of 99 North Sepulveda, which was a Hughes building right south of LAX and LA International Airport in Los Angeles, but technically in El Segundo, not the original Hughes aircraft building, just farther south, but the one closer to LAX. It's still there. We would get in, go up to the 5th floor, check in, sign our name, put our date of birth, our social security number, and a special project number. Mine was my UCLA ID number, 700-414-879. And then we would get back in the elevator, go up to the 7th floor and check in at our lockers, where, for example, I would get my gun. I had a handgun, photo flash gun. And then we'd go up to the 8th floor. And from there, after about a 5-minute wait, we would be asked if we want to go to Mars. And if we said, yes, take me to Mars, it would start morphing from a normal elevator shape into a cylinder. And in about 20 minutes, when we were first going to Mars, it would get us to the red planet. It would just open up in a sub-basement of one of about 8 U.S. facilities in the middle latitudes of the red planet.
You were an adult at this point?
Yeah, I was a child in Pegasus. All the volunteers in that program were kids because they were testing the technologies on children.
Mm-hmm.
But I was brought into the Mars program, Project Mars, when I was 18, and I first went to Mars 2 months shy of my 20th birthday in July of 1981.
And it was an elevator ride. That sounds fantastic.
Yeah, also called a space elevator.
Yeah.
Which was the term known by people connected to Intel.
So
even people in Hollywood connected to Intel.
Wow. So what did you experience when you first arrived?
I experienced, when I first arrived, the first time I went up, I was greeted by 3 U.S. astronauts on the surface, 2 men two women and a man. The tallest woman was smoking, despite the fact that the oxygen was deficient on Mars. We would sometimes get hypoxia, sometimes even tunnel vision and severe leg cramps from hypoxia. But it was just, I heard a Scirocco in the distance. There were a lot of dust storms on Mars. There were dangerous predators that were either reptoid or insectivoid. They were not 2-legged, as some of those in the literature of the SSP have claimed. The insectoid looked like a 12-legged or 10-legged grasshopper, about the size of a small garbage truck, and he had huge incisors. They were huge sword-like teeth. And then the other inevitably lethal predator was a reptoid that looked sort of like a 16-foot tall velociraptor with a T-Rex head, but also the head looked sort of chicken-like. And that's the one I just saw bite one of my colleagues in half. So that's one of the things I didn't like about Mars. Is the whole time we were there, we knew that our life could end and our relatives wouldn't find out how we had died and make up some story. We also had very little food and water there. There was very little natural sources of food and water there. We were told not to drink the water because it would be potentially poisoned with chemicals. And there was no food there. We were not eating any, fruit or animals or anything. So we knew that we had to get home. We knew that if the device didn't work getting us home, we would starve to death if we hadn't been killed by predators then. So it was a place where I never felt comfortable. I mean, I did my job, I did what my country asked me, but it was not a fun visit. I mean, I got used to it, but it was not a place I would like to return to.
Was there a facility that you were in, or?
There were U.S. facilities underground. There were like 8 that I went to when I would arrive there, and I had to go back to get back to El Segundo, California. But I don't know if those are the only facilities there. There were also underground residences of one of the types of humanoids there, the Homo martis martis. They were shorter than us, had spindlier bodies. Some of the men had antennae. Some of the women had multiple appendages, either 4 or 6, but usually 2. And they looked sort of like Tibetans, but the men looked a little bit more not like good-looking Tibetans or Thai, but like the actor Marty Feldman, kind of haunted.
And were they native to the area, or were they also from somewhere else?
No, I missed that question.
Are you saying that those folks were native to Mars, or were they from somewhere?
Yeah, they were the original Martians. Now, the other group of humanoids like us that was on the surface were what I call the Homo martis terris, and they were usually taller and more muscular than contemporary human men, but not any more muscular than, let's say, or big than, let's say, Governor Jesse Ventura or Hulk Hogan, maybe, because they, of course, were the Martian humanoids who survived the solar system catastrophe of 9500 BC. So there had been natural selection for very robust humanoids, and they kind of both made up that contingent of humanoids of the million or so underground on Mars, both the first type I described and these type. And they were very much like us, but not exactly like us, because we haven't bred with them for, 11,500 years or more. 9,500 BC.
That catastrophe that you speak of, did that involve the destruction of another planet nearby?
Yeah, we think it was at least something that destroyed Tiamat, which was also called Maldek or Marduk, which was that planet that produced the asteroid belt that personages as august and brilliant as Sir Isaac Newton found there should be a planet there, according to the mathematical analysis of our solar system. So that was that solar system catastrophe, but what it is, we don't know. Some people have suggested it was an explosion of the Vela supernova, but that occurred way out in space, so the chance that it would have even hit Mars or Earth is remote. So it was something else. It was a nuclear war or a more localized geological event of some kind, but we don't know. But Mars was basically destroyed. It was struck like Earth was, and like Earth had a huge flood, hence the vast muddy wasteland that Hoagland refers to, which is accurate, a dried wasteland, a dried muddy wasteland. Because, of course, that was 11,500 years ago. It's dried by now. There's a very little water on the Martian surface, but there's a heck of a lot of water on this planet, 71% covered by water, right? So that event that caused Noah's flood or the flood in the Epic of Gilgamesh affected Mars and made it a vast muddy wasteland when it dried, but it didn't stay on Mars. But it really devastated Mars. It crushed Mars into sort of an oblate spheroidal planet and really damaged it. So there's very little life there, but there is life there, and that's what they're concealing.
So how far?
I think I missed. Go ahead.
I was going to say, how far actually is Mars away compared to how far we've heard it's away? If that makes sense.
Oh, geez, I don't know. I was always told it was over 1 million. But see, that's one of the mysteries of the jump rooms. How were they able to get us so far so quickly?
Right.
It was 20 minutes when we first started doing it, when Mars was in its 2-year regular orbit around the sun, is farthest from Earth. But then as Mars drew closer to Earth, it only took like 8 minutes in the jump room, from Earth to Mars or Mars to Earth. And as a result, we could go with like 4 U.S. chrononauts rather than 1 or 2. Sometimes we went by ourselves or one other team member when we first started going in July of 81. But that's one of the proofs that we were going to the actual Mars rather than some other planet in time space. Because when Mars was known to be getting closer, our trips were clearly getting shorter and the number of participants was getting more numerous because we could survive on the air that was in the jump room. So I don't know what it was doing, but it was doing something incredible. And Hughes was doing incredible things. I know from Major General Music interviewing one of Hughes's children that he was able to disappear, and he did that on me. I went into his office, and he went into the alcove next to his office where his desk was and disappeared. And I said, Mr. Hughes, I can't find you. Where'd you go? You have a hiding place here? But no, he was regularly doing that. He had some kind of device from Project Pegasus, perhaps the handheld chronovisor that my dad had possession of, by which he and Connie Chavez and I went from 1971 on Central Avenue in Albuquerque, New Mexico to 1931. And Old Town Albuquerque looked like Old Town Tucson, Arizona. It was just the Old West. It's incredible. Wow. So Hughes had access to extraordinary technology. And by the time the late 70s came around, the very year that he supposedly died, of course, was 1976. Isn't it interesting? That's when Michael C. Ralph says he began going to Mars via the jump rooms.
Wow.
Because Hughes was certainly in command of that project when I got on it in 1980. And he was a nice guy, but he was really kind of bipolar. So he would either be really sweet and charming or very irascible and opinionated and complaining, especially like with his staff members. So he was really a kind of a difficult personality, but he was clearly brilliant. And according to Mark Music and Doug Wellman, who wrote Boxes, he didn't die in 76. He died in 2001, 25 years later. And I believe that because I certainly met him in the 80s.
Wow. So a couple of questions come to mind. One, what is our interest, as far as you could surmise, in Mars, or what do our activities on Mars have to do with? And is there any credibility to the stories of slave colonies on Mars?
What?
I've heard stories about slave colonies on Mars. Is there any validity?
Right. That was all kind of started with the belief in the Mars Colony Corporation, which dates to the Randy Kramer claims. Okay. If you look at that image that had the little lady on the cliff top with the male companion slid down the cliff, that it's been called a lot of things, like Little Bigfoot on Mars or the little lady on the edge. Or, the original image from 2007 that I wrote was motivated to write The Discovery of Life on Mars, and by December of 2008, I spent all of 2008 studying that image, PIA 10214. There's dead bodies all around it. In the paper, I speculate that it could have been people who were enslaved on Mars who've died in service or been killed off, or even a war, or an open-air cemetery, or literally a group of people who were sacrificed, because there's little bodies all over the ground there. But then when the literature of the Mars Colony Corporation and Donald Rumsfeld's involvement in Project Mars was used in an imitative way by Randy Kramer, because I spoke of knowing and working with, and actually my father and I befriending Don Rumsfeld in Project Pegasus. He was a nice guy and a responsible guy, and quite an insightful and valorous guy. And Kramer invented the story of the Mars Colony Corporation, and then the leading publicists in exopolitics like Weber and Sala and Kasten sort of followed on that and kind of insisted that there needed to be a Mars Colony Corporation. Now, 40 years after I was going up there, maybe there is. So again, I don't want to be a pessimist or a skepticist because my goals are ultimately optimistic, but I didn't see any evidence of a Mars Colony Corporation or a mass enslavement of people. There were very few people up there. I mean, even William Whitecrow told me that when we were up there, there were 1,500 Americans in different locations around the surface of Mars. But then another colleague, Bernie Mendez, told me there was only about 40, and I never saw more than a few handful, sometimes none. Sometimes I just wandered around by myself up there, sometimes with a colleague like Brett Stillings, or two colleagues like Courtney Hunt and Brett Stillings, or one colleague like Bernard Mendez, or two colleagues like Bernard Mendez and Barack Obama. So I experienced a Mars program where there were limited groups of American, British, and Russian astronauts up there, or chrononauts. I saw no evidence of Germans. I saw no evidence of a Mars Colony Corporation. I saw no evidence of mass enslavement. So being true to my experiences, there you go. But I might be wrong based on what's there after 40 years. So that's the nature of the truth. You know, as the saying goes, the truth is a bitch. I don't know.
Were you wearing a suit?
Because I haven't been there in 40 years.
To deal with the atmospheric conditions, were you wearing some sort of a spacesuit kind of a thing, or?
No, we had a mask for the first jump. And I noticed that not only were the other three that greeted me there were not wearing that mask, but the tall woman was smoking.
Yeah.
I said, well, if this person's smoking, I don't need this. And it was kind of funny because I kept on yelling to them, can I take off my mask? Can I take off my mask? And the guy was laughing at me. I think that was a pretty typical reaction to be on another planet for the first time. So I took off my mask and I found I could breathe. One time I started hyperventilating from hypoxia, just as a natural reaction to low oxygen. And the guy talking in my ear said, okay, Andy, what's going on? Okay, well, put on your mask and start trying to breathe as slowly as you can. And I stopped hyperventilating. But I've had a hyperventilation issue since I was a kid. Just asking me, are you having any shortness of breath causes shortness of breath, right?
Right. Wow.
So I, most of the time, didn't have to put a mask on. So I seldom wore it, but I had hypoxia, maybe about 25, 5 of those 20 trips up there, where I had severe cramping in the calf muscles. My vision was tunnel vision and so forth.
Wow.
And it was described as hypoxia by the program. They said, Andy, what you're experiencing is hypoxia. It's because there's oxygen on Mars, but not enough, not what you're accustomed to. So just walk slowly, remain calm, and we'll put your mask on if you get short of breath, and you'll be fine. And that's what I did.
So what?
That's probably why Bernie collapsed, and I had to carry him a mile on my shoulder into the jump room that we called the corkscrew. I was told by CIA that I'd gotten a Space Medal of Honor for that deed of heroism, and I'm still waiting for it after 40 years. I'm now 61. I won that federal honor when I was 21. And I don't think that's an America that we can believe in, that keeps an American astronaut waiting for 40 years. Where's my Space Medal of Honor? Brett Stillings was told we all were awarded the Space Medal of Honor for going to Mars as young people. President Obama should have told the truth about Mars, because if Brett Stillings was right, and we all had been secretly awarded the Space Medal of Honor, as president, Barack Obama, known as Barry Soetoro, when we were going to Mars with him and trained with him, could have signed an executive order issuing all unawarded American astronauts their their salary, and their Space Medal of Honors. And he chose instead to make fun of us. I do not understand that. That is putting political opportunism above dedication to your colleagues in a dangerous aeronautical program. I don't get that.
Well, that sounds like who
I think that we're not thinking clearly as a country.
Yeah.
Barry has a long reputation of screwing over the country.
Well, and deceit. I mean,
Yeah.
Well, he went from saying that the only contact with Mars was watching Marvin of the Martians with his daughters back in 2012 when we identified him as one of our colleagues, which was a true claim. Notice how the new claimants in the secret space program never touched the Obama question, they never touched the Basiago question, or the Stillings, or the Mendez, or the Whitecrow, or the Johnston question, or the Ralph question, or the Neumann question, for that matter. But then, 10 years later, it was like 8 years later, in 2020, President Obama was on the Stephen Colbert show, and he said there is a secret space program, but I can't talk about it. Did he use the phrase Project Mars like the 7 original claimants were? No, he used the phrase secret space program like those who've been making up their stories have been using. So he was still in a way lying. But I did write him a letter again on July 20th of 2020, just like I wrote President Trump. And I said, Barry, look, I have to be honest, and you were a smart guy and a nice guy when I knew you in college, our college years. But if you do not come forward about the fact that you are the first American astronaut to reach the White House, you will be known as a president of dishonor. Why do you want to do that to yourself? Just come forward and allow yourself to be interviewed by Steve Kroft of 60 Minutes or somebody like that, and have them take you through the Mars program. It was a paranormal set of experiences, so you don't have to explain everything. Just do it. Just tell what happened, so everybody knows we weren't, for some reason, we didn't have any motive saying that Obama was on Mars with us. We, in fact, debated whether we should reveal that in light of the fact that he was the current sitting president of the United States. We thought people would disbelieve us, not believe us,
right,
for making such a claim. But we decided that if we lied and said Obama wasn't involved, if he then revealed that he was, we would be caught lying for him, or for the Democrats, or for the secret, the secret government, So,
for the audience, can we go to the beginning of that part of the story? Like, when did Barry first enter into your life in the scheme?
Well, we all came forward. I came forward in 2009, right? I was the third American astronaut to come forward after Ralph and Neumann. And then as a result, something amazing happened, which is that my fellow astronauts who were trained with me as well at College of the Siskiyous in Weed, California, William Brett Stillings and Bernard Mendez, Stillings of California and Mendez of New York, came forward. Then William Whitecrow, whose original name was William Paris, who had worked with me in Project Pegasus and Project Mars, and Dr. Ralph Kennedy Johnston Sr., Ken Johnston, who essentially has worked for all U.S. space programs, secret or unsecret, came forward. In 2010 and 11. In response, President Obama, who was known as Barry Soetoro by his real name, his Indonesian name, his birth name, hence which disqualified him for being president, or made him guilty of an impeachable offense by claiming that he was an American when he applied for an undergraduate Fulbright, which can only be applied for by foreign nationals when you attended Occidental College in Eagle Rock, California, went on the Stephen Colbert show and claimed that the only contact he'd had with the red planet Mars was watching Marvin of the Martians on Saturday morning cartoons with his daughters, Malia and Sasha Obama. He lied. He lied to the American people, and he lied against the interests of fellow Americans, natural-born Americans, who had been on the Red Planet, had been trained with him, and many times were on Mars with him. And I was one of them. It even went to the extent of me, I didn't save his life on the Red Planet, but I helped protect it, because there was an episode where Bernie Mendez and I got to one of the jump room facilities on the Red Planet before he did. And Barack Obama, as Barry Soetoro, was afraid to walk out of the jump room. He was in a grain elevator type jump room, staring at our knees, thinking we're two white guys who were going to beat him up. And I just sat down on the side of the jump room, that particular jump room, and said, Barry, we're your colleagues, we're your friends. It's certainly in your interest to let us help you out of this jump room. Because as you can see, if you can press yourself up or jump up to look outside this grain elevator-like contraption, there are no walls to this building. If we leave you here, you're going to be eaten. Okay, Barry? So just let us pull you out of here. And he grudgingly accepted, and I pulled, and Bernie Mendez helped pull Barack Obama, using the name Barry Soetoro, out of a grain elevator-like jump room facility on the Red Planet. So we didn't save his life in a clear and present disaster, but we helped protect it, and he still lied about us. So President Obama has some negative karma to correct in terms of loyalty to those who have helped you, who have helped protect your life. And I'm one of them. But I told him the truth when I wrote him in 2020. I said, Barry, look, out of the 2,000 or so same-age peers I met during my college years at UCLA, you were clearly one of the brightest, one I would trust the most with the presidency, because I was telling the truth. I didn't want to trade dishonor or untruth for dishonor. And his response was to admit on the Stephen Colbert show that there was a secret space program, but he just couldn't talk about it. Well, secret space program wasn't even the term I had been using. I had a Project Mars.net that was still up. We were calling it Project Mars, not the secret space program. So he kind of relented to what I was asking him to do, but in the terminology that was most current. And again, that was more concern for politicking than for the truth. And that's our problem as a country.
Certainly. Well, we are coming up against a bit of a time crunch here, but I do want to talk about briefly about Antarctica, and with any luck, we'll have you back for another episode where we can go more in depth. But what do you think of there's an awful lot of activity going on in Antarctica. Every story from the Promethean origin story to Stargates to Admiral Byrd's entrance into Hollow Earth.
Yeah.
What is your take on Antarctica?
Well, I think the Admiral Byrd story is true. I think that the Hitler story, where he got to Spain via U-boat and then to Argentina and settled in Bariloche with Ava Braun and their twin children, is true. I've seen the pictures. I think they're indisputable. Some people have said they're a double of Hitler, but I'm not buying it. I think to the extent that Hitler and Himmler were Roman Catholics, the Vatican rat line theory makes sense. So the Nazis got as far as Paraguay, because the Bariloche, Argentina destination of Hitler and Eva Braun, and where they reproduced and had twins, leads to the Adolf Stroessner regime in Paraguay, where they lived for 10 years, and then Hitler supposedly died of natural causes in 1962, 10 years later. If Hitler got to Argentina at the end of the war, and died in Paraguay 17 years later, 1962. Clearly, that could have been enough time for the Nazi regime to try to recharge its batteries in Antarctica. I also believe the fact that Al Gore, John Kerry, and Buzz Aldrin went down there to view the artifacts or alien bodies under the ice. It would make sense for the Arctic or Antarctic ice to be melting because of climate change. Now, I don't believe the Corey Goode story that when Kerry, Gore, and Aldrin were sent down there, invited down there, a UFO showed up behind his house and took him there. I'm not sure that Corey is distinguished enough when you compare him to those three individuals of a previous generation, almost. So I think we have to be somewhat guarded about some of the claims being made about Antarctica by a Corey Goode, a David Wilcock, if you will, even a Michael Salla. But
those guys
the
generally
basic subject, I think.
I'm sorry, aren't those guys generally regarded as charlatans at this point, though? I mean, is there any credibility to their contribution?
I find all the time, I get calls where people are still hanging on to the belief that the Randy Kramers and the Corey Goodes were ever telling the truth. And I try to explain the fact that those who had really gone never claimed that they were. We knew they weren't. Whether they were opportunists, delusionals, or disinformants, or some combination thereof, we never knew. I'm leaning towards disinformant, but that's just because of how ardent they've been in spewing lies about the secret space program. But that doesn't mean, in the same way it doesn't mean we weren't on Mars, it doesn't mean that the arguably most successful American, Al Gore, I mean, being a member of the House, Senate, and Vice President for 8 years each, and then his party's nominee, and then winning an Academy Award, a Grammy, and an Emmy. Whether you support Al Gore or not, he's clearly a very accomplished American. Same thing with John Kerry, Senator, Secretary of State, party nominee. Like Gore, a graduate of Harvard or Yale, right? Mm-hmm. And then Buzz Aldrin, the second human being from the modern epoch of civilization to walk on the moon. What I doubt is Corey Goode's assertion through David Wilcock that a UFO showed up behind his house to take him there because Gore, Kerry, and Aldrin were sent. So that's what we have to be discerning about, what I'm talking about. But so I think that original story is probably true. We have the proof that Aldrin, who's quite elderly, got evacuated to New Zealand or Australia for heart palpitations or a heart attack. That can be checked. So that's the problem with the uncredible who have been considered credible by so many people. They have obscured true history, and true history was our original goal in the truth movement.
Absolutely. Well, I think we could go on for another hour just on that topic alone, but I'd love to have you back on the show sometime soon. Hopefully you'll join us.
You've got it. I'd love to join you again. It's been great. I think we've covered a lot of ground today. Yes. And I think we've reminded our fellow citizens that truth is where it's at. So harbingers of truth matter. You know, the fact that candidates for president like President Trump and I in 2016 were making a matter out of the fact that President Obama had not been born in this country, had been born, he thought, in either, President Trump thought in Kenya, but I knew had been born in Indonesia, was not racism. It was not competing against Democrats, because I had been a lifelong Democrat before then, before I declared as an independent. It was our constitutional duty as candidates, because that's what the Second Amendment requires, that somebody be a natural born citizen of this land to qualify to run for president and to be elected president and to serve as president. And that's not the test that Obama met. He was born in Indonesia. We even have the documents of him using his name in kindergarten, Barry Soetoro, with his religion being cited as Muslim and a picture of him as a tall kindergarten student. This was never made up by anybody adhering to the so-called birther movement. The birther movement was simply an attempt to impose the constitutional standard on Obama. There was a sound reason why we didn't let foreign-born people be president, and that was so that our government wouldn't be pushed towards another country. It wouldn't be, the presidency wouldn't be handled in a way that would benefit another land versus this great land.
Wow.
And I think, in fact, we may be dealing with foreign liabilities, foreign problems. For example, in our relations with China, that resulted in electing this Indonesian-born person. He was president for 8 years, and he was not natural born.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not making that up. We proved it on the records, and he told me that when I was in training with him, and we were even sharing the same dorm room at College of the Siskiyous. He said that he was born in Indonesia as an adherent to the Subud Mormon or Muslim sect. So, I mean, when you're told something when you're 18 years old, you don't forget it when you're 55 and the person's been elected president, not 55, no, 50, so 59. So
dozens of questions on that topic alone that we'll have to wait for the next interview. But where can our audience find your materials and any books that you've written?
Well, I originally started projectpegasus.net. Well, I actually started projectpegasus.com. In this doubtfully jeopardized country, projectpegasus.com and projectpegasus.net were stolen as domain names by somebody who served in DARPA's Project Pegasus. I now have projectpegasus.info. Fortunately, I was able to save projectmars.net, and it's still there. Now, in the process of building that website, Facebook became a bigger deal, so I could reach more people with that. And there was more opportunity to put other people's Mars findings. So originally, Project Mars on Facebook grew to 13,500 members who were posting their stuff. It's now kind of receded a little bit to about 12,000 members publishing their stuff. But we became the leading Mars anomaly research group in the world. And it's still up there. So if you have findings from NASA's photographs from Mars, post them there and identify when you found them and where you found them, what part of Mars you were looking at. We have featured the work of probably about 25 major anomalists, 15 who worked for our organization, maybe 10 independents who didn't. We'll be putting out a book with all the greatest findings in 2028. The 20th anniversary of my book, The Discovery of Life on Mars, was published in a paper. And I will continue to publish answers to questions about time travel on Project Pegasus. Now, my television and radio interviews, podcast interviews, are being posted at Andy for America, the residual Facebook group from my presidential campaign of 2016. I'm not running in 2024 and probably will never run again, but it's still there because I still believe in the country and want to help it. So I'm posting my interviews there. There's probably about 8 or 10 up there now from the last year or so, but ultimately hundreds and hundreds of interviews will be posted there.
Wow.
Well, gosh, thank you so much. This has been, to call it stimulating is an understatement, but But thank you so much for joining us here on Truth Stream. And Joe, do you have anything to close out?
Yeah, just hang out after, because we had I have some insight for you on a possible publishing thing, but we can go into that after. But everyone, thank you for watching. We appreciate it. We'll put all the links below, and look forward to the next time. So take care.